Hello and welcome to RFW Foundations, Getting Started Building Your Recovery-Friendly Culture. My name is Jeannie Venuti and I am the Director of Workforce Development at RFW. A quick overview of our training today, what we will be discussing, what are substance use disorders and what is recovery. We're going to talk about stigma and safe language, identifying substance use concerns, adopting a recovery-friendly approach, and then we're going to talk about the resources that are available to you here in the state of New Hampshire. Just a little content warning, we will be discussing substance use recovery as well as stigma, so if any of this content feels overwhelming to you, please feel free to take some space, take a step away, or engage however you need to. There are some group training norms. Since you're all watching this as a recording, this may not apply to you, but just think about these training norms if you were to participate maybe in this training as a group and that you were having discussions or any training really where you're amongst your coworkers. So we want to talk about confidentiality. If you're talking about sensitive subjects, if you're sharing stories, you want to make sure that lessons leave with you, but the stories stay. You want to keep those stories confidential between you and your coworkers or whoever else is in the room. Practice self-care. What that really means is if we're talking about a sensitive topic, sometimes you might need to take a step back and take care of yourself, take a breath, go for a walk, get a drink of water, etc. It's always okay to ask questions. I'm sure you guys have heard, the saying, there are no stupid questions. There really are not. So please always feel comfortable, always feel safe to ask questions as they come along. Respond without judgment. Basically what this means is you really want to be a good listener and not judge when somebody's sharing their story. We're all experts of our own experiences. We always welcome different points of view. No two stories are going to be the same. And then assume good intent with the attend to impact. What that means is assume that whatever people are sharing, what stories they're sharing, what lessons they're sharing, that their intent is good and their intent is to make a positive impact. First section today is what is substance use disorder and recovery. So what are substance use disorders? We have some definitions. The American Society of Addiction Medicine adopted the following definition of addiction: that it is a treatable chronic medical disease involving complex interactions among brain circuits, genetics, and environment in an individual's life experiences. So all of those things. People with addiction use substances or they engage in behaviors that become compulsive and often continue despite harmful consequences. That is the technical definition. And they also note that prevention efforts and treatment approaches for addiction are generally as successful as those for other chronic diseases. Now we have a gentleman named Raj Mehta. He is a person who is in long-term recovery, also works in the field of SUD and recovery, and he defines addiction as the main symptom of addiction is the inability to get high successfully. And what he means by this is that when you have a substance use disorder, you're not getting high successfully because it's negatively impacting many, many different facets of your life. So it could be impacting your work, it could be impacting your relationships. Maybe you're showing up to work all the time. Maybe that individual is stealing from their loved ones. So you're not getting high successfully because it is negatively impacting your life in numerous ways. This slide is titled Understanding Substance Use Disorders. And I call this the light bulb slide because this is the slide that shows scientifically how somebody may choose to use a substance to when that substance hijacks or takes over the brain and then it no longer becomes a choice for them. Our bodies are designed to maintain homeostasis and keep us alive, and our brain is the control center. Our brains have etched into them a reward center as well as a place to store memories. They work together to tell us to do life-saving things such as eat and drink, take care of our children, etc. So when we eat food, for example, our brain releases a chemical called dopamine, which tells us that, hey, food is awesome and we need it to stay alive. This is then communicated to the frontal lobe and locked into our memory so we don't forget that we need it. So when we eat food, our dopamine levels are raised by 50%. When somebody ingests cocaine, those levels jump and are raised by 250%, as you can see from the second photo. You can imagine what happens to the brain. It's flooded with dopamine and it goes into survival mode because its job is to keep the body in homeostasis, which it clearly isn't at this moment. So the brain then does some things to react. The first thing it does is it shuts down some of the dopamine receptors to try and bring balance to the dopamine levels, but then it also stops producing its own dopamine. These reduced dopamine receptors in the brain are associated with impulsive behavior that can lead to escalating and compulsive self-administration of drugs. So the individual's tolerance level will also increase because the brain is shutting down some of its own receptors. It's also producing its own dopamine. So now the individual has to take more and more of the substance just to feel like that level set, that normal feeling. Never mind the feeling of euphoria. They're going to have to take even more than that to feel that same euphoria that they felt the first time they took the substance. So at the same time, the midbrain is saying, hey, this is great. This brings me more pleasure than food, so I'm going to send this signal to the frontal lobe and put it into my memory. It's so great that we should do it again and again. So every time the person uses a substance, that signal's going to the frontal lobe. Hey, remember to do this. Hey, remember to do this. We really like it. It brings us pleasure. So the midbrain, again, is sending these memories of pleasure to the frontal lobe to the point that the brain now thinks the substance is life-saving, just like food and water. The substance has now hijacked that part of the brain that tells us what we need to stay alive. It's now replaced the food, the water, loving our children as life-saving things that we need to that substance is now a life-saving thing that we need. Now that the brain is hijacked, the individual may also experience intense desires or cravings for the addictive substance, and they'll continue using it despite the harmful or dangerous consequences. The person will also prefer the drug to other healthy pleasures and may lose interest in normal life activities, things that they once found pleasurable. In the most chronic form of the disease, addiction can cause a person to stop caring about their own or others' well-being or survival. The initial and early decisions to use substances reflect a person's free will or conscious choice, just like I said at the beginning of the slide. However, once the brain has been changed by addiction, that choice or the willpower becomes impaired. Perhaps the most defining symptom of addiction is a loss of control over substance use. I had somebody tell me once, she is the mom of somebody who is now her son is now in long-term recovery. And he was explaining to her the need for a substance, what it feels like to him. And this was this was such a moving discussion that we had. So what she told me was her son described it as, imagine somebody holding your head underwater. You're unable to breathe. That feeling, that need, that desperation for air is the same feeling that somebody gets when they have a need to use a substance that they're addicted to. Social determinants of health are external, social, and community factors outside of someone's control that affect their individual health and well-being. In this context, these external factors may put someone at higher risk of developing an SUD due to additional stigma, discrimination, and institutional oppression that have excluded certain populations of people from social infrastructure and public benefit systems designed to keep us safe and healthy. This additional stigma may compound the stigma of substance use disorders, or the exclusion may not provide relevant access for somebody to receive treatment for recovery or to be able to ask for help. So really, this is all about risk and protective factors. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services definition is the conditions and the environments where people are born, where they live, learn, work, play, worship, and age that affect a wide range of health, functioning, and quality of life outcomes, and risks. Social determinants of health are big picture factors that can impact risk of substance misuse across entire communities. What is recovery? There are a couple of definitions. Collective wisdom of people in recovery, researchers, thought leaders, shown here on the slide. There are many ways to think about what recovery is and what it means, but just like substance use disorder, each person's recovery will also look different. There's no cookie cutter form of treatment that will work for everyone. Everyone will need to choose their own path, and although it may not always work, and there may be some setbacks, it is their choice. We know that the success rate of those whose paths are chosen for them or they are forced into a certain type of treatment are lower than those who are given the choice themselves. Why does recovery look different for each individual? First of all, substance use disorder falls on a continuum. What that means is that, for instance, people with a mild substance use disorder may recover with little or no treatment, but people with the most serious form of addiction usually need intensive treatment followed by lifelong management of the disease. There are several different pathways to recovery, and people will choose their pathway, depending on several things. One could be their cultural values, their socioeconomic status, the services that are available to them financially, but also that are available to them in their area, the area in which they live and work, based on their psychological and behavioral needs, as well as the nature of their substance use disorder. In this next section, we're going to address stigma associated with substance use disorder, as well as safe language. So, what is stigma? Stigma is a combination of a label and a stereotype generalized to a group of people without regard to their individuality. So basically putting somebody in a category, defining them by that thing instead of as a whole person. Substance use disorders are actually the #1 stigmatized health condition in the United States, with alcohol use disorder being the 3rd. So stigma impacts public support and opinion and can be internalized by an individual. So basically, the definition is reducing a person to nothing more than their difficulty. So saying that they are one thing. It can be one of the most damaging and dehumanizing forms of language. Basically, somebody is an addict. When you use language like that, that's all that they are. They're not a mom, they're not a friend, they're not a coworker, they are an addict. It denies the existence of any other facet of the person, like I just mentioned, any relevant roles or characteristics other than their diagnosis. So what happens? Stigma leads to discrimination. The impact of stigma, what this slide is showing, that because of stigma and discrimination, less than 15% of people with a substance use disorder will actually come forward and seek treatment or get help. This slide is a stigma example, which was conducted by the Internal Journal of Drug Policy in 2010. And so these 2 jars are representing language to describe somebody who is actively using drugs and/or alcohol. The first person, the first jar, they were called a substance abuser. And then the second individual, the second jar, was a person having a substance use disorder. So just by using those 2 phrases or those 2 types of language, how was the individual who was called a substance abuser treated compared to the person that was called a person having a substance use disorder? So the person who was called a substance abuser was considered personally responsible for their condition, that they should be punished, and that they are assumed to be violent towards themselves or others, and that the solution to their substance use is moral versus medical, that it is not a medical condition, it was a poor choice that they made, etc. So at Recovery Friendly Workplace, we talk about how language matters and using what we call safe language. We call it person-centered or person-first language. Changing language isn't just about impacting the way individuals feel, though feelings are valuable and important. Changing our language can prevent the discrimination against people with substance use disorder that often results from widespread stigma. We encourage people to change the way they talk about substance use disorders for 3 reasons. 1, you never know who's in the room with you. You may be talking with somebody who's just lost a loved one to substance use disorder. You could be talking to a person in recovery, or you could be talking with someone who's been afraid to reach out and ask for help because they know they will experience stigma and judgment. Number 2, research shows that when doctors use unsafe language, they give less than medically necessary care to their patients. So they're actually putting their patients at risk, and their jobs are at risk as well. And then number 3, substance use disorders are recognized by the Americans with Disabilities Act, and you could be discriminating against people by using unsafe language. So this is like learning a new language. We hear the not that language all the time on TV, in newspapers, on social media. So it's important to practice using this language just like you would when learning any other new language. Now, we don't recommend that you correct people when they use the not that language in conversation. We recommend that you model the best behavior instead, unless it's appropriate. So if a person were to use the not that word of addict in describing their partner as an example, we might validate what they're saying, but gently insert the safe language by replying, "Oh, so your partner is a person with a substance use disorder." It really depends on the situation. In some cases, we wouldn't even do that, but just use the safe language whenever we spoke and allow the person who's speaking to use their preferred language. And so I always tell people it is just like learning a new language. It's going to take practice, but I don't want the fear of saying the wrong thing to stop you from having the conversation, because having that conversation is more important. And so I'm going to show some examples of say this instead of that. Also want to note that we want to respect the autonomy of people in recovery and their stories. So they may refer to themselves as a junkie or an ex-addict, and that's okay, because for them, by using that language, it's a reminder of who they used to be, possibly, but not who they are right now. So we certainly don't want to correct people. It's their choice to use whatever language they feel comfortable using. And so I'm just going to go through some of these. Person with a substance use disorder, again, putting the person first. A person in recovery, person living with an addiction. I'm just going to keep sliding through these. And then it's going to show the opposite language. So using the phrase a person with a substance use disorder as opposed to addict, junkie, druggie, or alcoholic. A person in recovery instead of ex-addict. Person living with an addiction or living with a substance use disorder instead of battling or suffering from an addiction. Drug offender, saying a person who is arrested for a drug violation instead of saying drug offender. Person with a felony, as opposed to just felon. So think about that phrase for a minute. Person with a felony, you're thinking, or just saying felony, or saying a person with a substance use disorder, or saying addict. When you hear the phrase person with a substance use disorder, you're thinking of them as an individual. They are not just a person. They are not just the substance use disorder. They are a human being on top of that. But when you hear the phrase addict, junkie, druggie, you're thinking in your brain, that's all that they are. And let's keep going. So chooses not to at this point instead of saying non-compliant. Medication is a treatment tool. We're talking about medication-assisted therapy. Instead of saying medication is a crutch or saying that somebody is just replacing one drug for another. Had a reoccurrence, instead of saying relapsed. I use the term setback quite often. So you could say had a setback as well. maintained recovery or stayed clean. So the word stayed clean and then dirty, clean, drug screen, you're thinking of a person as being like dirty if they have been using, and we don't want to refer to people with a disease as a person who is dirty. And then substance use disorder instead of substance abuse. Or we could also say substance misuse, which means they may not essentially be addicted to that substance, but they're misusing it, meaning they may be using a substance in a way that is not prescribed to them. Died by suicide or instead of committed suicide. Okay, so the next thing we're going to talk about is identifying substance use concerns and adopting a recovery-friendly approach at your workplace. And so this slide is about identifying substance use concerns, what to look for if you suspect somebody is using or misusing substances on the job. So identifying employees with a potential substance use concern is something that should not be taken lightly by any team member. The signs and symptoms of substance use can often reflect other issues. So they might be showing signs and symptoms. Maybe they're showing up really exhausted. They're showing up late, which could mean that they are misusing substances, but it could also mean several other things. Maybe they're having issues at home. Maybe they just had a newborn and they've been staying up all night. So just remember to keep all those things into consideration. And so the following list may suggest a possible substance use concern, but should be used cautiously. Decreased morale or increased negative effect, meaning, maybe they are a very happy-go-lucky person. They're always coming into work cheerfully, but now they're coming in and they seem sad or they seem depressed and their mood is different than it normally is. Unexplained or sustained increases in absenteeism, lost productivity. So maybe they're not producing what they normally do. Maybe they're showing up late. Maybe they're leaving early and it's consistent. Maybe they're making a lot of mistakes at work that normally they don't make. They might have a frequent interest in either hosting or attending different parties that focus on alcohol. And they might have a tendency to forget important conversations, specific details. Again, these things didn't occur previously. Constant discussion about under the influence experience or activities. Maybe they're talking about how they partied last weekend, or they did this, or did that, or they hung out with a new group of people. So the bottom line is you're looking for change. That's the word you want to think of. Change in mood, change in finances, change in productivity. And so they might also be experiencing substance use related legal or financial problems. Maybe they recently had a DUI or something along those lines, but a change in finances. Again, we want to focus on the word change, different changes in behavior, mood, productivity, activities in their life. But that's the word you want to focus on is change. How do you help somebody who is experiencing a substance use problem? So while having some possible signs and symptoms of an SUD, a substance use concern, may be helpful, the best identification practice is to have an open and honest conversation with employees in a safe, supportive, and recovery-friendly environment. So creating this environment is a key to becoming a recovery-friendly workplace. And you can enter kind of this circle at any point. We can start at being open and honest, showing empathy and compassion, leaving judgment at the door, having a plan and resources. So this training can help you develop that plan, and there are going to be resources at the end, and offering that tangible support. So having a plan in place. So you may be thinking about, well, how do I even have this conversation with somebody if I suspect they're misusing substances, but I don't actually know? You need to consider the Americans with Disabilities Act, and you don't want to accuse somebody obviously of something where it could be something completely different that's going on in their life. So here is my suggestion. Coming in, being open and honest. I noticed that your productivity has been lower. I noticed that you've been showing up late and that your mood has just been off. Um, these are all things that you're observing about them. You're also addressing things that have to do with their job performance, right? But you're not accusing them, or you're not asking them, are you abusing, or are you using substances? But you're being open, you're being honest, you're showing empathy and compassion. I'm really concerned about you. I notice that your mood is off. You're typically in such a happy mood when you're at work. Is there anything that you'd like to discuss? If they choose to have that conversation with you at that moment, fantastic. I'm going to equip you with some resources and some tools to assist them at that point. But if they're not ready to have that conversation at that point, maybe they're nervous, maybe they have trust issues, maybe they're just not ready. Maybe they're just taken aback by the fact that they're having this conversation with you. Let them know, okay, we need to address these performance issues, but I also want you to know, if you want to have a conversation at a later time, please know that my door is always open for you. So you're kind of planting a seed. If they're not ready to have a conversation with you just yet, at least you're opening the door to them having one in the future. And again, you're able to address those productivity or absenteeism, any work-related concerns at the same time, but then leaving the door open maybe later to have a conversation about why these things are happening. So again, this slide is about identifying substance use concerns, the recovery-friendly approach. Creating opportunities for these types of courageous conversations in the workplace does take intentional thought and action. So be sure to implement a policy that provides job security. You can develop what we call a return to work agreement, which is kind of like a leave of absence type of agreement where it holds each party accountable, meaning it holds the individual accountable for getting treatment, whatever that may look like for that individual, but also on the employer side, it could have a portion about you checking in, maybe having them sign a release of information so that you're able to confirm that they're taking the pathways that they've agreed to on this return to work agreement. Noting that once they've completed it, it's kind of like if somebody gets injured on the job, like say they break their leg, they've got to go to the hospital, they've got to get a cast. You want to be able to check in and make sure they've gone to the hospital, they've gotten the cast, they're going to physical therapy, they've gotten the sign off from the doctor saying that they're able and ready to come back to work in a healthy way. So on your end, it's your job to make sure that they have followed through with that entire course of action, that they are in fact healthy and ready to come back to work. The return to work agreement with substance use disorders is very similar to that. So implementing a policy stating that once you complete, your course of treatment and you're healthy, your job is going to be waiting for you once all those things have occurred. Identifying different leaders and team members who are recovery allies. It could be people who are in recovery themselves. It could be a trusted HR person, but just having a person or persons that all of the employees know this is a person that is safe to talk to about my substance use concerns. And then adopting an approach of consistent supportive follow-up rather than punitive employee monitoring, which kind of goes back to that slide previously, just showing support, having resources ready, not approaching them in a way where they feel, their job is threatened or they're being accused of anything. Just keeping that open and honest dialogue with that compassion and empathy. So elements of a recovery-friendly culture, this is going to kind of reiterate a couple of things that we've already talked about, but really driving it home. And so we want to create that recovery-friendly culture. What does that look like? You want to have a communication style that's open, honest, and non-stigmatizing. Performance, this is a question I get from businesses quite often. So performance, balance between productivity and maintaining employee wellness. So I have an employee call who has an individual that they're getting ready to have like either a return to work agreement with or a conversation with. And they say like, we really want to help this individual, but we're struggling. We're struggling right now. We don't know what else to do. And what I tell them is, like, yes, you obviously want to help people, but you have two other things to consider and think about. One is the health and wellness of your other employees. And then the second is that you have a business to run. So finding that balance between wanting to help people and also considering that you have a business to run and other employees to take care of. For some reason, when I explain that to businesses, it's kind of that light bulb moment of okay, we get it. We know what this balance looks like now. So decision making, if you have people, let's say you're developing a new policy, a return of work agreement, and you kind of don't know, like, I don't know what this should really look like. Getting the input from people who have possibly either developed a return to work policy or have participated in one, or people who are in long-term recovery to kind of give you feedback from their lived experience. A compassionate and transparent atmosphere. Really, the best way to create that is just by having conversations. I always tell people that the most powerful tool that I have in my toolbox is my voice, and having conversations about substance use disorder and recovery is the best way to start that open, honest communication, that open door, that recovery-friendly culture where people feel comfortable and safe talking about substance use disorder. And then team approach, again, if you're developing policies, if maybe you're creating an event and you want to be sensitive to people who are in recovery, just taking that team approach, being inclusive and collaborative, asking for people's opinions. And then again, that structure, like we talked about in a previous slide, being supportive and not punitive with clear feedback mechanisms. And again, I refer back to that return to work agreement. Of course, if you want more information about it, feel free to reach out to your recovery-friendly advisor. But having that return to work agreement really states each person's responsibilities, and it's something that's signed by both parties. So both parties agree upon it. Both parties are going to be the ones responsible for following through for their part. And it lends itself to being creating that supportive as opposed to punitive environment. And it also has very, very clear feedback mechanisms. The next section is accessing New Hampshire resources. We are very fortunate in the state of New Hampshire to have two systems. One is 211, which is nationwide. Every state has 211. It's an information and resource and referral phone number. It is free to call. They are available 24/7, 365 days a year. But what is unique about New Hampshire's 211 system is that it connects you to our doorway system. Our doorway system launched right around the same time as Recovery Friendly Workplace. And so the way that I speak to the doorway is through kind of the voice of a friend of mine who went through recovery before the doorway system happened. And what she said was, if it wasn't for her mom, she probably would not have found recovery, because what her mom had to do to get her into treatment was to go onto Google, pull up a bunch of different treatment centers, call each one, see if they had a bed, see if they took insurance. Okay. We know when somebody has a substance use disorder and they're ready for recovery, you've got a very, very small window to get them services. Okay. If you're a person who is ready for recovery, and you have that small window, and you're being forced to call numerous treatment centers to find out if they have availability, what services do they provide? Does it even fit what I'm looking for right now? Do they take my insurance, et cetera, et cetera? You know, by the second or third call, that person's going to be so frustrated. They're going to be, they're going to be done. And so with 211 in the doorway system, when you call 211, you're actually going to be asked if it's a substance use disorder related call, because you're going to be triaged. Any substance use disorder calls are going to be placed to the top. Okay, they're going to be answered immediately or almost immediately. So you're going to get on the phone with that 211 specialist, and what they're going to do is a warm handoff to a doorway. So what is a doorway system? We have 9 doorways in the state of New Hampshire, and each one is equipped to help a person seeking recovery navigate the system. Okay. So they are talking to that individual about what their needs are, what kind of treatment they're looking for, and then they're going to help them navigate the system. Instead of that individual having to call all of these treatment centers, trying to figure out who has a bed, who takes their insurance, etc. Their case manager at the doorway system, they're going to provide an assessment, a case manager, and that case manager is going to help them navigate not only through, their recovery journey, but any other services they might need, whether they're housing insecure, food insecure. That individual is going to help them navigate all of the things that they need to be able to find and maintain recovery. So again, we're so fortunate to have this system in the state of New Hampshire. I actually was just trying to help somebody who they lived in New Hampshire, but their loved one lived in the state of Maine. So we're trying to navigate their insurance in the state of Maine as well as the treatment options. And it was just like that story I told you previously about my friend from years ago. We were calling, each of us had a list, and we broke up the list, and we were both calling, trying to find a treatment center that had a bed and took insurance, et cetera, et cetera. And it was frustrating. So again, so lucky in the state of New Hampshire to have this system. And so this is a map of where the doorways are located in the state of New Hampshire. This system is designed so that each doorway is located within an hour of where anybody lives in the entire state. The only exception is the North Country, where it may be a little over an hour for a drive. So each center has their hours in which you can just walk in. You don't even have to call 211. You can just walk into any doorway. You can enter any doorway. It does not have to be the one that's closest to you or closest to where you work. It can be any that you choose. If you're calling and it's after hours, you're going to be referred to Dartmouth Hitchcock. So there will be a doorway that is available to have a conversation with you 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. This is an RFW Accessing Resources flyer with QR codes. This is something that was recently developed by one of our fantastic recovery-friendly advisors. As you can see, you've got all sorts of New Hampshire resources on here with the QR code, and also a brief description to the right telling you exactly what that service is. These can be provided to you electronically. We also have paper copies, so you can hang them in your break room. And if people need a resource, it's a quick pull out your phone and take that photo and click on it, and it will lead you right to that resource. It's a fantastic tool to have. And again, it is available electronically, but we can also deliver paper copies for you to have on hand as well. I'm not going to dive completely into all of these resources because there are a ton of them on this slide as well as the next. If you'd like a copy of these slides, please just reach out. Happy to provide them. But these are just some of the numerous mental health, medication-assisted treatment resources, treatment locator services that are available to you or to us in the state of New Hampshire. And again, here are some more resources. Treatment locator, the Sampson National Helpline for referrals to substance use and mental health treatment. And then we also have a link for a national directory of recovery community organizations. We have a directory in the state of New Hampshire. Obviously, you can call 211 as well. But say you're in another state and you want a recovery community organization resource in another state, this is going to lead you to that. If you don't know what a recovery community organization is, it's basically a center that provides support to people who are seeking recovery. It is peer-led, meaning the people who are running the programs are people who have experience in substance use disorder and recovery. They have their own lived experience. And we find that peer-led community centers where people can lend, that past experience to people who are new to recovery or who are seeking recovery has been extremely helpful. And so that is a national directory throughout the United States if you are seeking an RCO. These resources here beyond New Hampshire, these are some national support programs for mental health. 988 has been in existence for a couple of years now, and it was created to focus on mental health issues or emergencies instead of having to call 911. So when you call 988, you're getting somebody who specializes in mental health and can help you navigate the system to help you get the help that either you or a loved one needs. And that is the end of our training today. Thank you so much for participating. Here's a contact us page. So Samantha Lewandowski is our program director, and that is her email. Again, I'm Jeannie Venuti. I'm the director of workforce development, and that is my email there. Again, thank you so much for participating. And most of all, thank you so much for being part of the recovery, the Governor's Recovery Friendly Workplace Initiative. We really appreciate your dedication and your participation.